was telling Leah I will be telling a story about Mayor. So
So
not
for
one
those
you
of you
haven't
who
heard.
don't know who this Nanette Stinskin is, with Mayor, her husband actually founded Summit, and Mayor did pass away this year, but Nanette is here with us tonight, who I'm sure you remember Joe fondly if he was with Summit for all those years. And I'm particularly under the weather, so I'm going to let you guys talk, and I'm going to let Joe do his presentation. I'm recording it so that we'll send it out later. And we have some really wonderful, familiar faces here for this presentation, but it'll also go out to all of our families and our Facebook community and everything tomorrow. So take it away, Joe.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Leah. And it's great to see you, Nanette. And I love that I'm back with the Summit community after, I don't know, was it 20 odd years, 24 years? It's been a long time. And for everybody who's here, if you're comfortable, turn your camera on. If you're not, that's okay, one way or the other. But I like seeing faces. It helps me to know if my jokes are going over or not. And so just anyone who's comfortable turning your camera on, that's helpful. And I'd love to see you. So so tonight, we're going to start off with I'm going to give a little presentation, and I'm going to kind of give you my backstory, what brought me to the work. And Leah, one more thing before you head out. The whole thing, just so in case you don't come back, are we meant to spend about an hour tonight?
7 to 7:45. It's usually 7 to 7:45. Yeah.
Okay. So it's 7 now. So what do we have? We have 40 minutes. Is that right?
All right. A little more, I think.
All right.
You can go you can go as long as you like. It'll just start recording. It'll just stop recording after like an hour and a half. That's it. So
great. Well, let's say we're going to do an hour. That gives, and if we need more, we'll take a little more, but let's do an hour tonight. And what I want to do is, I want to spend the first half an hour kind of talking about one particular area that my work speaks to. And that is really why are ADD kids also defiant? Why are these things paired together so often? And, you know, in getting there, I'm going to give you my background. I'm going to talk about my own childhood and home life, which might sound reminiscent to you or your children's. And then I want to talk about my experience at Summit Camp, because that was, you know, really instrumental in me developing a perspective. And then the book that I wrote and what led to that. And then the research that came out of that book, because the University of California in Santa Barbara did a research study for a year on a school that used the method across the board. And, you know, and lastly, I want to open up just a couple basic tools that speak to this particular issue of defiance and why we see it so often in our children, why we're seeing it more often, particularly, I think, ADD, ADHD kids. But it works the principles will apply with a lot of different children with neurodiversity or different learning problems as well. Now, and after the half an hour, I'd love to open it up and have a conversation. So any kind of questions that you have at that point about what I talked about, or other questions you have, particularly regarding behavior, I'm happy to jump into. My next book is kind of a broader theory that explains why we're seeing such an increase in mental health problems with our kids and what we can do about it. All right. So having said that, I'm the author of Raising Lions. There's the book. And Raising Lions came out in 2010. And second edition came out 2 years ago. And I'm working on that second book. And I came to the work fairly honestly, in that I was the kid that you didn't want to have in your class. My mom used to talk about bringing me to the playground as a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. And she said she would show up with me at the playground and the other mothers would quickly gather up their kids and leave. So I'd have the playground to myself. And And so when I got to school, initially I sort of was in a free preschool, and that went pretty well. But once I got into public school, everything started going downhill. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't, listen to directions. I was constantly interrupting the class. At the end of the first grade, my teacher wanted to have me held back and to repeat first grade. And my parents said, yeah, but he's testing ahead of his grade, so we're pushing him forward. And then in the middle of the second grade, the teacher told my parents, I think he's hyperactive, which they hadn't heard of before. It was 1970, so the term ADHD hadn't really even been coined at that point. And we lived in Maryland, so we were in the middle of where the research was going on about ADD and ADHD at Johns Hopkins and at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. And so I was diagnosed and medicated in the middle of the second grade. And while I was still probably the toughest kid in the class to handle, it made a big difference. I will say I remember the relief of not being in a fight every day. And I could see before that I was driving the teacher crazy. And I remember my second grade teacher was really loving and caring, and I didn't want to drive her crazy, but I drove her crazy anyway. And I'd break the lead of my pencil over and over so that I could get up, walk across the room, sharpen my pencil until she said, I'm pretty sure the pencil's sharpened. And then I'd come back, and on the way, I'd find a couple of things to do before I got back to my seat, and then I'd sit back down. And so a lot of that impulsivity was mitigated by the medication. However, I was still constantly hearing a stream of the list of things that I was doing wrong. And so I'm going to go to the first slide here, and apologize. We're going away. Okay. All right. We should open this up first. Hold on one second. I'm going to find our slideshow. There we go. All right. So this is what I heard in the second grade, in the third grade. Okay. It was constant information about what I was doing wrong. So it was, Joey, keep your hands to yourself. Joey, sit still. Take your math book out. If you don't do that, you're staying in for recess. And I think the important thing about it was that I knew all of these things that I was doing, but it wasn't that I had a cognitive problem. I didn't have a problem understanding what I was supposed to do. I had a problem just doing it. And in the class, there were lots of things that were more interesting. So this barrage of information became a normal part of my life. And I want you to think about it in terms of, if you were in a place where 95% of what you heard was corrective, was identifying what you did wrong, that becomes your identity in that space. And so in school, school started to represent more and more what I did wrong, what I wasn't good at. And gradually, that starts to create an entirely different problem, and particularly a different relationship with how you respond to people telling you what to do or asking or reminding you what to do. Okay. Now, I'm going to pull that out for a second. So in particular, I think by the time I was in high school, beginning of high school, I remember the relationship with my father at that point, which was always adversarial. We started fighting, probably when I was 11 years old, and we kept fighting until I was probably 30. And when I was 14, I remember that among the sort of chores that I had to do was to take out the trash. So every Tuesday morning and Friday morning, the trash had to be taken out to the curb. it was a short job. Probably took me 5 minutes to bring the cans out the 75 yards to the curb. And so the night before, garbage day, my dad would come home from work. And I remember when I would hear his car pull up in the driveway, and I would get this little sense of anxiety, and I would start to think, if he doesn't remind me to take out the trash, I'm going to take out the trash. And he'd come in the door, and within 3 minutes, he'd say, "Hey, you didn't forget today's trash day, did you?" And I go, "Nope, I didn't forget." And about typically an hour later, 45 minutes later, he'd say, "You know, you got 10 minutes before it's dinner. It's a great opportunity if you want to take out the trash." And I said, "Oh, you know, I think I'm going to wait." And after dinner, he'd say to me again, "You know, you got 5 minutes before All in the Family's on. Why don't you take out the trash?" And I'd say, "I'm not really in the mood." And while we're watching the sitcom, I could remember knowing, I don't know if you're familiar with the term act break, but my wife's a TV writer. So an act break is when they start to set up a big joke before they go to long commercial. So I could see at 14, I was like, oh, they're setting up for the long commercial. And I would think to myself, if he doesn't tell me to take out the trash, I'm going to take it out. And, but sure enough, we'd hit the long commercial, and he'd say, "Hey, this is a long commercial. Why don't you take out the trash?" And I go, "No, I don't think I want to do it." And sometimes I would force myself to stay up as late as possible, so that I could do it without being told. And some nights I couldn't stay up later than him. And so I'd set an alarm so I could get up and do it before he got up. And sometimes I would forget to do it at all. Okay. And the important thing is, and I tell this to parents, and parents are like, "That sounds so familiar." You know, the more I tell them, the less they do it. And there's a reason for this. And that's because in that conversation with my father, there were two different conversations going on. There's a topical conversation, the obvious conversation of a father reminding a son, an ADHD son who's distracted and probably is got 100 other things that, you know, he's probably trained you into this, but that to remind me to do certain things and to get them done as I'm supposed to. But there was another conversation going on in my head of what I was hearing. And each time my father reminded me to take out the trash, what I heard was, "Hey, stupid, I know you can't remember on your own, so I'm telling you, take out the trash." Or, "I know you're an idiot because I've got to tell you the third time tonight, but take out the trash." Despite the fact that I was told this many times a night, twice a week, for years. So what I was saying when I was saying, "No, I don't want to," was I was saying, "Screw you. I'm not stupid. I'm not an idiot." Okay. I wanted to make that choice myself. And every time he gave the information preemptively, he stole the autonomy from that moment and my ability to do it. And he reminded me what I was doing wrong. So I had a whole place of my defiance was a way to assert a feeling of dignity, a feeling of my own power. If he was going to take the credit, which is what it felt like, the credit away from me before I could do it, then I was going to push back with my power and refuse to do it. Okay. And on the other hand, there's the father's perspective, right? Because, and I thought, I'll be honest, I really didn't think about this till I was 40 and I was a stepfather myself. But then I started realizing it's like, it's frustrating to not have your needs met. It's frustrating to not get the things you need, and there might be a part of him that was just thinking, you know, he's so distractible. Maybe if I tell him over and over and over and over and over again, eventually he'll adhere to this structure of remembering, and it'll change things, and he'll be better off in the world. You know, so it wasn't either. He was doing his best. It was, you know, I was impulsive and inattentive, and so the dynamic wasn't his creation. I mean, we co-created this dynamic, but the fact was, the information over and over given was creating more defiance than it was solving a problem. Okay. And some people will ask me at the end of the story, they'll go, wait a minute, what should he have done? And I'd say, honestly, in hindsight, I would say he would have said nothing the first week. And then when I came to him for my allowance on Friday night, he'd say, here's $5. And I'd go, well, where's the other 5? And he says, well, you didn't do it the other day. I did it. And then maybe if that happened on a regular basis, he'd say, look, nothing personal, but it makes me nervous when the trash hasn't been taken out by 9. So I'm going to take it out at 9 and I'll just keep the half the allowance. And then, but if you want to take it out by 9. If you don't, then just know that I'm going to take it out, but you won't have that part of the allowance. But I'll let you decide. So allowing me to have that moment where I decide that myself and to change the dynamic to one where there's an expectation that I can figure that out. Okay. Would be a way to change it. And that also speaks to some of what I end up doing in terms of school trainings. Because I do a lot of school trainings now and I train staff in terms of behavior management programs and this kind of thing. So a lot of what I'm doing is teaching parents how to handle problems without making a bigger problem, which is what that information typically does. Or, there's a number of other things that fit in the same category. But now let me pause for a second. All right. So I'm going to give you a little sum up of. There we go. So here's some of the things that were happening in that dynamic with my father in the trash. Okay. And these are reactions to unnecessary information. How do you know it's unnecessary information? If you think about something you said, like let's just take my father, for example. If you think about him coming home 5 minutes after he walks in the door, and before he says it, he asked himself, what if I said to Joey, I'll give you $2 right now if you can tell me what I'm about to tell you. Could I answer the question? And the truth is I could. And for most parents that I ask this question of, and they fill out a worksheet when I work with them and I do parent coaching and help them create behavior plans and scripts. And I'll ask them, I want you to look at all the times in the day when you're giving your children information about their behavior. And I want you to imagine if you'd froze and you offered them something super incentivizing, some real motivating thing, a trip to Legoland, a PS2, or whatever it is. PS2 might not be the new one, but whatever the new one is, if you offered them the thing they really want, if they could answer the question, could they answer it? And if they can answer it, particularly about behavior, about requests that you're repeating, then it's unnecessary information and you're stealing an autonomous moment from them. So what happens as a result of that is these 4 things at a minimum. There's defiance, because now they have to push against you to feel like they have autonomy, because the opportunity to solve the problem isn't there anymore. Second is there's a reactive thinking developed, which is children, you've lost or you've taken the moment for them to be in a habit of prompting themselves. Okay. Third, it's a negative self-image, because they're getting so much feedback about what they're doing wrong. Even if you're saying it in a nice tone, even if you're loving, the fact is you can't counter the reality of that child getting so much information about their flaws. Okay. And third, and this could be a whole topic in and of itself. I coined a term called passive tantrum in my book, which means feigning inability to avoid difficulty or assert power. And the more information you give, the more you're implying that they don't already understand that information. And the more you encourage them to feign an inability to remember or to solve the problem on their own or to do it. And this can apply in a lot of different areas. It's kind of rampant culturally right now, which is children learn that if they feign inability, the parent will create an accommodation and either move the boundary or remove the obstacle or the frustration. And you build you basically can build defiance, build an identity based on pulling back and pretending you're unable to do things. Okay. So, all right. All right. So, now I want to jump ahead a little bit and talk about how I came to Summit Camp, because this will lead into how I started to apply the principles I just talked to you about. Okay. Hold on. I think I'm out of screen share. Nanette, am I out of screen share? Can you see my face now?
Are you what?
Yes,
think
you
that
are. You're out of
Great.
screen share.
Thank you. All right. So, so after high school,
You can say whatever you want.
all right, great. So after high school, I left. I spent 7 weeks in college, dropped out, shaved my head in a mohawk, went surfing, and spent the next 10 years doing 35 different jobs. I was good at them, but I couldn't stick to anything. And eventually, I woke up one morning after a particularly dangerous evening and really realized I needed to have some sort of a purpose in life. And I spent about 5 days in kind of prayer and meditation, and realized, oh, there must be millions of kids having the same really crappy experience that I had in school. So I started volunteering at a local elementary school, and I was good at it. And 6 months later, I applied to be a counselor at Summit Camp. Mayor Stiskin, Nanette's husband, was coming to Washington, D.C., where I lived. And so I went and met him at a hotel, and we had an interview. And at the end of the interview, and I told him about my experience and my feeling about ADD and how it can be a superpower if you understand it, and about my own quest, understanding that about myself. And at the end of the interview, he said, well, I can offer you a job, but I'm not giving you a contract today because I have a different job in mind for you, but I can't tell you what it is until I talk to my wife. And I'm like, okay. And so he says, give me a week or two. So 2 weeks later, he calls me up and says, I want you to be our crisis intervention specialist. Okay. And I'm like, well, I don't have a degree, and I only have 6 months experience. He says, I think you got good instincts, kid. And so he hired me to be the crisis intervention specialist, and I worked alongside a guy with a PhD. But we never got to talk and train together because we were just too damn busy, to be honest. We would meet before, and we slept in the same bunk, and I'd look over and we'd say goodnight, and we'd see each other next morning, and then we would go running again after the crises. After that year, I came back as the head of education. And that first year in education, I did something intuitively that later became the method that was studied by the University of California. And that was the way that I ran that room full of kids that were impulsive and emotionally easily, combustible, and bouncing off the walls and touching each other, and, constantly their mouth running, offending one another, whatever it was. And because I'd chosen education because that's where all the crises were. So that's where I went that next year. And what I would do as to manage that classroom is I would give breaks. And so I'd have, imagine 10 or 12 kids in a room, and Brian would grab something from Cody, and I'd say, Brian, I need you to take a break for a minute. You can stand right there at the threshold. And he'd go, why? What did I do? I said, I can't talk about it. It's no big deal. And I'm not mad at you, but if you take the break, in a minute, you can come right back in. If you don't take it, I have to count down, and then my assistant has to take you out further. Okay. And so you can imagine, actually, in that first couple of days, we had to take a lot of kids out. They were dragged out. That's the reality. The first couple of days, but I kept repeating that language, and I kept repeating that pattern. And there were certain qualities to that language and that pattern. And that in particular, it was an easy thing to do. I never talked about what the behavior was. So I didn't go, Nanette, you need to keep your hands to yourself. Take a break. Or I didn't go, Jen, I'm tired of you interrupting me. Take a break. Right. I need you to take a break. When they got upset, when they got defensive, it was, hey, I am not mad at you. Or I didn't say you did anything wrong. You take a break, you come right back. If the argument started going, I said, look, we can talk about it after class, but in 5 seconds, I have to count. And then if you don't take that, you get the 5-minute break. I'll let you decide. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. And after about 3 days, it started working really well. And everything started to mesh, and kids were getting more and more done than they'd ever gotten done in education before. And they were enjoying it. And my favorite part of that whole summer was halfway through camp, when half the kids go home and they're replaced by another set of kids. So you have a class with 5 kids who you've been doing the method with for 3.5 weeks, and 5 kids who've never heard it before. Okay. And I'd lean in and I'd say, or I'd start to do the process with someone who hadn't done it. And I'd say, Scott, I need you to take a break for a minute. He'd go, why? What did I do? And I'd say, it's no big deal. You take a break. And he'd go, no, I'm not doing it. And as he would get upset, the kids who had been doing the method, who'd heard the method, turned to him all of a sudden on that first day. And they said, you're not in trouble. If you take the break, he lets you come right back. He's not mad at you. Just take the break. Because we had changed their relationship with conflict. We had changed because I wasn't reminding them of what they were doing wrong, because I wasn't saying it was wrong, because I was stepping out of even a conversation about that and just giving a simple map of like, I just need you to pause for a moment, come right back. Okay. And I got buy-in typically within 2 days instead of 3 or 4 with that second group of kids, because they were being coached by the first group of kids. Okay. So, all right. So I went on after summit camp to kind of go from school to school for years, and then different agencies working with extreme behavior problem kids. Some of what I developed, we really don't have time to go into tonight. You can read Raising Lions. But after the book came out, there was initially, it was a self-published book because it was when Amazon was just rising and all the bookstores were closing. So my literary agent had no idea what to do with it. And so she proposed it to a bunch of publishers, and they were like, we're not really sure where this fits. It's very different. So I self-published it, and I probably sold 250 books the first year it came out. Most of that to my friends. But the second year I sold twice as many. And the third year I sold twice as many. And what I realized were teachers were selling my books. Teachers were reading the book and they were giving it out to parents, or they were holding it up at the parent-teacher conference. Said, you got to read this. This is explaining what's happening with all our kids, which is kind of unexpected because I thought it was just going to be for, the really tough kids. But it ended up being for teachers in all kinds of situations and parents in all kinds of situations, just dealing with challenging behavior. And this led to schools asking me to train their staff. And after a couple of years of this, there were a number of schools in the Santa Barbara area. I got together with the head of he was the president of the International School Psychologists Association, who happened to be in Santa Barbara. He was the head of their department, and he asked if he could do a research study on my method. So we went in and hold on, make sure. So we went in and we did 600 observations of the classrooms before I started, and that's pre-K through 6th grade. At the end of that observation period, I went in and trained the staff. Now, what did I train them at? I give you sort of the basics of the method that I shared with them. Okay. All right. So this was the 2017. I gave them a structured, predictable action consequences to behavior. The break protocol was the standard of that. I asked teachers to stop talking about behavior. Okay. This is with a regular school population. Stop giving information and explanations that children already know or can easily figure out. Okay. So that's the structural part of that. Okay. Action, not information. Okay. And don't give the information they don't need. Then remove the judgment, remove the moralizing. I'm not mad at you. I didn't say you did anything wrong. Okay. Recognize their autonomy and avoid cajoling. So it was like, look, you can take it or not take it. It's up to you. If you don't, this next thing happens. So you're speaking to them like a protagonist. Okay. And then remain unattached to their choices. And so move through that. Well, that's the next thing you'll learn. There's an assumption of ability that happens, and then strictly and empathetically administer a cause and effect environment and let them adjust. So, so I trained all the teachers to do this in a workshop, and then I spent about 3 days working in the tougher classrooms. And then did a little follow-up workshop with them. And then they went and they measured again, and they did another 600 observations about 2 weeks after I finished. And then they did another 600 observations 3 months later. And the results, sorry. Oh, by the way, this is a visual of what their whole process was in the school. Okay. I try and boil things down to the simplest way possible. In the class, I need you to take a minute at the focus desk. If they didn't take it, they waited another 30 seconds, it became a 5-minute break. If they didn't take it, they waited 30 seconds, it became 15-minute break in the office. That was time they had to make up. This time they could just come back and catch up. So there was no penalty whatsoever. The goal was to get them to buy in here. So within the first couple of days, I will say, in the first 48 hours of using this in a school, you have a lot of these 15-minute breaks in the office. Kids are testing the end, they're going there. But as long as you keep the charge out and you keep repeating the process and doing it across the board with all kinds of different kids, quickly you get about 99.5% of all interventions end right there. Kids go, spend one minute at a focus desk, don't need to talk about the behavior, and then they come back. These are the emotional steps that where you're taking the charge out of the conflict. You don't talk about it. That opens up an argument. Okay. You take out the charge, you remove any accusation of right or wrong. You recognize their autonomy. You reassure them they're good and you like them. Okay. That's the whole bit. All right. And the results were an almost 50%. Yeah, I mean, if you don't count the 2 classes that didn't do the program, because we had 2 classes that were the control group, but including the 2 that didn't do it, we had an almost 50% decrease in all off-task behavior in the school. And the most powerful information and takeaway from the whole thing was that there was a disparity. So when we looked at the research at the end, there were some classes that showed an 80% decrease in all off-task behavior, and some that showed like a 25% decrease. So we wanted to know, what's the difference between the class getting the spectacular result and the one getting a decent or, average result. And so fortunately, one of the things that we had done is we had charted and observed everything that the teacher said during the class and what they did around breaks. And it turned out that all of the discrepancy between the great result and the kind of crappy result was how much information did you give about behavior. So to be clear, the more you talked about behavior, the worse it got. The less you talked about behavior, the better it got. Okay? And what they saw happening is that by not telling a child, Nanette, I need you to keep your hands to yourself, take a break. In that moment, you become the adversary and you've provided the solution. And if I just say, Nanette, I need you to take a break for a minute, then in her mind, she goes, I need to keep my hands to myself. And everyone else in the class watching goes, we need to keep our hands to yourself. So they're self-cueing and creating a habit of mind to regulate and to know where that boundary is. And they're not defiant because it's their own prompt. Okay. And they autonomously come up with it. So that's why this worked. Okay. That good tone, a positive or neutral tone was super important. And there was a dramatic decrease in office referrals. So the office was, about 20% the number of referrals as they typically had in the school. Okay. So, so I'm going to end with just a slide that you have here on some ways to put this structure into use in your home. Okay. If you have a 4 to 12-year-old, a break protocol works really well. Sometimes you need some coaching on how that turns the corner. Most people can get it from my book. I also do parent consulting. So some people call for some help with that. But that's a structure. It's a simple map that happens. Action, other action, other action. Within that thing, because you repeat it, a lot of the charge is going to start to come out. I use things, I use something called the this before that tool, which just means that there are certain times in the day when the internet automatically goes off. And until you've finished this, it doesn't go back on, or you don't go to your play date, or, there's things that there are non-preferred things that happen at assigned times. And when they're finished, the preferred things start again, and you intersperse those. The silent tool is a way to just say nothing in moments when you would have prompted something. Wait, kind of give yourself a minute. And then if they still haven't done it, give the break. What you find happen is that they start to children recognize that silent moment, and then they self-cue and take care of it without you prompting. But you have to do that in a patterned way. I typically, they know what they're doing or what they need to stop doing. I'll say nothing. I'll look at them for a minute. If they're still doing it, oh, I need you to take a break. What happens is the next time you go like that, in one of those moments, they go, oh, and they correct the behavior because they know what's coming. So you've got internal prompting. If you don't have a smart router and you've got kids between, honestly, 3 to 18, get a smart router. That gives you a chance to turn off internet and apps at certain times instead of having to wrestle the iPad out of their hands. And do your best to stop giving, repeating unnecessary information and explanations. All right. That is my whole presentation. I would love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear any questions you have, and yeah, any thoughts. Nanette, you want to start?
Yeah, well, you brought back a lot of memories. First of all, I think you were the first person who ever spoke to me about different styles of learning. And you talked to me about, we were just having our own discussion, and you talked about how different kids have different styles of learning. And I've been aware of that all my life, with my own children, with my grandchildren. You can tell, you can see, and they don't have to follow a particular pattern in order to learn something. They have their own way, and they'll get there. And if they don't get there, then, they're open to help. Do you want to give help? But the other thing that I think always worked at camp and works with all kids is to not do what your father did, unfortunately, and to reward the good behavior. Because a lot of kids don't get that enough. And I find in the wider world that I kind of follow that anyhow, because no matter where you are, there are people working who get a lot of the negative comments because they didn't do this, or I didn't get my return. You said that you would turn the, so I make it my business to always either write a note or make a call and tell someone I appreciated what they did that helped me out in whatever the issue was. And I think with children, it's even more important. If they get a lot of negatives, you know, like what you were saying, if the teacher is always telling them, well, I told you not to speak when I'm speaking. I told you not to play with your papers when I'm doing this. No, what you said is exactly right. They'll figure it out. They'll know what was disruptive. And innately, they want to please you. They want to please the teacher. They want to please their parents. Let them know they did it right. And I got a lot of that thinking about it from conversations we have. And I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Did you ever tell Mayor you wrote a book? I never
I
knew
don't think I
about your book.
did. It's, you know, I know I didn't have a conversation with him. We hadn't talked since camp, to be honest. You know, I
That's
just,
too bad, because I'll tell
I
you
know.
something. When I read this thing about your coming and speaking, and that you wrote a book, I went and I looked for the book online. So I looked at the chapter headings and I thought, oh my God, I could have used this. Not only that, I'm recommending it to my niece, who's in exactly the position that you've been speaking of, because just from the chapter headings, I could tell where you're going, and it's priceless. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, a guide for parents. I know it's for teachers also, but for parents, it's a lifesaver.
Yeah, most of it. I mean, if you read the reviews on Amazon, most of the parents are getting the help. Because a lot of parents don't understand the nature of the defiance that they're getting or how to turn that around. And they're just doubling down on sort of explanations or approval and disapproval. And, you know, I will say, just to swing back to what you said about, like, one of the things that I really started with at Summit Camp was, I don't think ADHD is a disorder. I'm ADHD. For me, I am a highly divergent thinker. Sometimes that's problematic. Sometimes it's fantastic. And I wanted, so when I came to Summit Camp, one of the things that I did in education is I have a very high tolerance for chaos. I like it. I like moving around. I like a little yelling out. You know, I'm not a big fan of hands to yourself all the time. We can work those things out. That's all right. So the lessons that I did, we were building things. We were talking. We were competing. There was yelling involved. There was a lot of stuff going on. Tim Kedge, who was the director at the time, after about 2 weeks, he came to me and he says, Joe, I'm hearing some disturbing things about education. And so he says, I'm hearing things like chaos and you know, things keep changing. And I'm like, our kids thrive on chaos. They thrive on change. And then on Parents' Day, all those kids brought their parents to education. They had never brought their parents to education, to show them what they'd done. And dads were lining up to use the things that the kids had built in the projects they had made. It was, you could see, like, you know, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. It was like these were those kids grown up, and they were dragging their dads and moms over. And so I think it's important to realize people have very different learning modalities, and, you know, and so I have a high tolerance for that. And I try to encourage people and schools to do the same thing and help children find their gifts. Particularly if they're going to a school where they've got to sit still all day, and that's not the way they learn.
That's a very good point. I have to tell you, I had that discussion with one of my grandchildren one day about the weather wasn't good or whatever, so they didn't have recess. So I said, what did you do instead? Well, nothing. And of course, the class was absolutely climbing the walls by the end of the day. Kids need to be able to get up, to walk around, to, you know, use their energy. And I think that's another thing that teachers have to learn, and parents have to learn.
Just want to open it up if there's any other questions or thoughts from the group. You can unmic yourself and jump in if you like.
Hey, there seems to be a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, great. Let me look in there.
Yeah, Anissa, this is Thea, by the way. Hi, I work at Summit Camp.
Don't worry.
Anissa says, this might be a very basic question, but can you discuss what happens or the guidelines of the break? And then
Right.
Jennifer lawyer
What does
says,
the break
I
look
have a
like?
question too. What does a break look like in the home?
Perfect. Okay. And this is probably the most important question. So let me go into that. All right. So a break process. First of all, you always want to set up a simple what happens when they don't do it. Because initially people read the book and they might think, well, I'm going to try and do a break. And they say, I need you to take a break. But then they don't know what to do when the child refuses and they argue. So the first thing to understand is that there is a concrete structure that happens. You talk about the break as if it were a roadmap. Okay. It's like if you were sitting in the passenger seat and your friend was driving and they were new to Los Angeles and you're on the 10, you're going, hey, in 15 seconds, you're going to need to pull to the right to get off in La Cienega to get where we're going. And you're not going to grab the wheel. Just, hey, here comes the exit. 5, 4, 3, 2. If they got off the exit, in this case, they sat down for a break, it stops right there. They have the 1 minute. And I'll talk about that in a second. If they didn't, 5, 4. Oh, now you have the longer break. Or now you have to get off at Fairfax. It's going to take you 5 more minutes to get where you're going. Okay. Wait, attach. If you don't take that break. Now, the third step varies based on the situation, but that's sort of like the end of the road. So for some kids, it's you can say, look, for a 4-year-old who's hitting you or throwing things around the house, or a 5-year-old, you say, look, I'm going to hold you and I'll wait until you're done. Okay. Most schools can't do holding, so that's not an option. But at home, that's what it looks like. A lot of the families that I go to, that first day is me taking them through that stage. And initially, when they do that break protocol, this is very important. No matter how perfectly you ask them to take a break, no matter how much you take the charge out of it, they're not going to take that first exit because they're scientists. And they're going to go, well, let's see what happens when I say no. I like to be in control. So they're going to go to the next one and the one after that. So you have to be prepared and detached from them making that decision. Allow them to not make that decision, move to the next thing. So in the room here, I'm doing the break, and, Cody, pushes over his 2-year-old sister, and because she's touching his Legos that he just built. And Cody, I need you to take a break for a minute. You can sit right there. Make it easy. Make it close by. You want it easy to do, but it has to happen with a very limited time. So I say, Cody, I need you to take a break. You can sit right there in the chair. No, she's always touching my things. She's ruining it. Why do I have to take a break? Can't talk about it until it's over. But if you don't take it, it gets bigger. I'm not getting up. I'm not trying to physically move him there. I am staying where I am. Very important. Okay. That is showing you're going to make the decision to go, or it's going to get bigger and you're going to deal with that. I'm going to let you decide. Don't move to them. Do it. Don't do it. I kind of try and channel my grandfather from Brooklyn. You do it. You don't do it. I don't care what happens. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So he's sitting. Great. Okay. So you ready? I'll start the minute. He's not sitting. So now you have the 5-minute break. No, I'm not doing it. You're mean. Maybe he even runs away. He runs away. I still don't get up. I pretend like he can hear me. Well, I have to count down, and in 5 seconds, it becomes a holding break. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then I might go. I might hold him. I might wait, sit him in front of me and wait until he's quiet. and then he does 5 minutes. I'm sorry. I'm getting my numbers mixed up, but for a 5-year-old, it might be 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute. For a 7-year-old, it might be 1 minute, 5 minute growing break or a loss of resources. But those are meant to create a roadmap that they take seriously. When you repeat that map, and jump in here if the two women who had the question, I'd love it if you want to jump in and ask and tell me what you're thinking while I'm describing this. That would be great, because I can then address your
So I have this is Anissa. I have a 6-year-old
yes.
who I think could use some of those types of, suggestions, the 1 minute, the 3 minutes, that kind of thing. But I also have a 16-year-old who goes to summit camp, and he's gone to summit camp for 2 years and has had a very successful experience there. And, really, he's a very mild-mannered kind of child. But, we do have a few issues. So, I think this is very interesting. So how do you handle it for like an older child? Is it the same way, just like a longer time period kind of thing?
Yeah. So breaks are tougher to do the older they get, to be honest. I have parents who do it with, have done it up to 15 or 16. And I think it has to be handled a little different, and you have to be very good about giving them a sense of autonomy. Let me talk just briefly about the 6-year-old. So this is a framework that works for a 6-year-old. 1 minute, 5 minute growing break. A growing break just means they don't take the break. Like, you see, look, if you're not sitting, I have to start a timer, and the timer is going to be a delay on the next thing that you want. And the timer doesn't stop until you come back and take that 5-minute break. So they run away, they hide in their room. It's like, okay, look, the growing break timer starting. Let me know when you're ready to take it. Otherwise, you can lose up to half an hour of your next thing. And I say that as a timer because I want them to feel a sense of autonomy, so they can turn around, come out in 5 minutes and go, I hate you, and then sit down and take the break. Okay, you ready? Great. You see what I mean? So with a 16-year-old, I would primarily use, I would use this before that. You can use breaks, but if you use the breaks, if I use the break with a 16-year-old, I'd say, look, maybe he curses at you, or, he loses temper and throws something across the room, or, and I'm not sure, you might throw in what your likely scenario is there.
So, I mean, he's a very, very good child. Like he's a, and he shuts down rather than has externalizing behavior. So he's an internalizing behavior. So if he's upset or something, he's more likely to just sit there and, disengage, go to sleep, that kind of thing. And that's how he handles life. Like if things are hard, he just kind of shuts down. He doesn't, we're not having throwing, we're not having cursing, we're not having things like that. But what was very interesting to me was when you were talking about, the reminding of, the taking out the trash and things like that.
Right.
Like, I don't, and how that reframed in your mind, like, hey, I'm reminding you because you can't do this on your own. Like, that's what I want. I don't want my internal voice for him to be one where I don't think he's competent. I don't think he's skilled, that kind of thing. So I think that this before that, would be a very helpful thing. And I was just trying to think about it, because you were talking about the breaks, but when you did talk about it, you did say it was, 3rd grade to 5th grade. So I was just like, I didn't think it would necessarily work for my son Connor, who's 16, but I just wanted to kind of get that confirmation from you. And so how can we speak to our children so that, our voice is one that's, you know, kind of building them up, not tearing them down, because they do need prompting, but
Yes,
we don't want to over prompt. So
right.
that was
So
my
I think,
question.
all right, good. That's super helpful. So yeah, I think we want to talk to our children as if they're, first of all, as if they're in control of how they're going to do things, and that whether they do things or they don't do things, that's up to them. But certain things have to be done before other things happen. So if you've got someone who's refusing, it's more likely that he's got a pattern of sort of passive tantrums or pulling back and refusing to do things that you need him to do. And so I had a parent of a 15-year-old, I think, in England who said, you know, her son had, and in this case, he had said some nasty things to her she wanted to resolve, but he was refusing to talk to her at all. So I said, look, what's the next thing? What's something he really wants to do that's coming up? She said, well, there's a party on Saturday he really wants to go to. And I said, let him know on Thursday or on Friday that you need him to have a conversation with you to resolve this before this happens, before he can go to that party. And he can do that today, he can do it tomorrow, but one way or another, that has to come to a resolution. You'll let him come to you to settle that before you're going to bring him to the party or he's allowed to go. And then step away and let him do that. And I think something that you need that's measurable, that you can see as an action before other things that he gets. It has to happen in a transactional environment. And that's the place where it's like, there's a big difference between reward and punishment and cause and effect. Okay. Reward and punishment is, if you do this, then I'm going to do that. Or unless you do this, I'm going to do that. Or I'm sick of that. This is what's happening. Cause and effect is, look, you'll do this, you won't do it. But until this is done, this thing that I do for you doesn't happen. It's nothing personal. I would love to do that for you, but I can't control you. Okay. So maybe you have things that you're reminding him of all the time. And it might be, you know,
Well, it's like a hygiene task. Like he's now homeschooled. And so
Yes.
for him, a shower is a very ridiculous expectation of me to expect him to shower. So that's our main problem right now, is trying to just
Great.
get
All
that
right.
hygiene.
So simple part of that would be say, look, let's say I'm assuming he likes internet connection.
Yes,
Right.
he gets 2 hours a day.
Great. Then you say, look, I can't make you shower. And I get that you don't even think it's important. That's your decision. But you live here. It's important to me. And it's a need that I have. So if you meet the need, the internet goes on at 4 o'clock. Until you meet the need, the internet stays off. And if you're okay trading your internet time for not taking a shower, then you can make that choice. But that's what the internet cost. It cost a shower. That's it. That's my price. You can pay it or don't pay it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm not saying you're dirty or stinky. I'm telling you what I need and what I like and don't like. And it really has nothing to do with you. Okay. And he's going to argue and he's going to be upset and he's going to say, look, we're not supposed to get along. You're 16. Right now, a lot of our relationship is, I'm going to write tickets and you're going to speed. It's okay. We're not supposed to get along on everything. You're in the world, you'll figure that out and you'll decide, do I need to take a shower before the date or can I risk it? Can I go on the date without the shower? And then you'll find out whether or not, your date is cooperative to the non-shower agreement. I don't know. That's you and your date. Right now, you live in my house. If you want internet, I need a shower. That's it. Do the shower, don't do the shower. You can do the shower from any time from 8 in the morning to 4, as long as the shower is done. And I've seen you've spent, a minimum of 10 minutes in the bathroom and you come out wet. I'm going to assume you showered. Okay. But that I would say that's a this before that scenario. It's like, look, there are things that you take for granted that you think you deserve. What I'm saying is that they're part of a transactional relationship that happens when you live with other people. That's all. Do it or don't do it.
Thank you. That is very helpful. We tried to do like the whole, hey, what's up? Why aren't you taking a shower? Ross Green kind of talking and, trying to do all of his expectations and planning for that. And none of that is really working. So
No.
I've tried, and there are certain things where the Ross Green method works very, very well for Connor, but the showering, it hasn't worked well. So I appreciate that advice, and I will be putting into place. And I think just being very clear with what the expectations are, and this before that, that's very valuable advice. So I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to jump in before we got a couple minutes before we wrap up?
So my son is 18 and we are trying to get him to, and failing miserably, to take the initiative to do some of those things on his own, so that it's not us always saying, it's time for you to take a shower. We have the shower struggle as well. And it has not gone well at all. We've tried, we worked with like a behavioral therapist for many months, and created these elaborate checklists, and you have to earn this many minutes by doing this. And, there's these 6 things that have to be done before you get on your device, and these 6 things that have to be done in the morning. And we just got so much more pushback that we tossed that all aside, and we're right back to square one, where we're saying, it's time for you to go brush your teeth. It's time for you to go to bed, where our goal was for him to say, oh, it's 8 o'clock. It's the time that I need to go and do this. So, getting him to, pulling our control, if you will, away and giving him the control, he's not about it.
Yeah. And I think, okay, so I think that the first thing is, realize there's going to be a conflict and be okay with that and detach and just give him autonomy. The less you say it to an 18-year-old, I think the better. Okay. So it can be, you can start the conversation with, hey, there's something I need you to do before I drive you to the thing you really want to get to desperately in 3 hours. And I'm giving you a 3-hour heads up, but it will probably take you, 20 minutes to do. But if it's not done by that time, I won't be taking you, we won't be taking you there. And then leave it there. Well, fine, whatever. Blows you off. Shows up, time for leaving. Hey, I'm ready to go. Okay, well, I can take you, but I need something done first, and we need to sit down for a second. Oh, fine, what do you need? So I'm going to call everybody Scott today. So Scott, look, I need you to write down the stuff that you need, that that I remind you of every day. I need you to write those down and put it somewhere where you're responsible for it. Why? I know everything. I know what you're going to tell me. It's like, look, the reason I need you to do it is because you hate when I tell you. You hate it. You hate being reminded of it. And I don't like doing it. It's a lose-lose situation. And I'm done. I don't want to say any of it anymore. And what's going to happen from now on is you're going to write that stuff down. And when certain things come up on a regular basis that you need, I'm going to say, check your list. But I'm not going to say any of those things ever again. And I'm going to have a copy of that list so that I know if the things I want, you're going to know what I want, but we're not going to talk about it anymore because it drives us both nuts. So you'll do it or you won't do it, but certain things are just going to stop at certain moments. And they'll start up when you're done.
So
That's
what
it.
about when it's something like getting to school that he could care less about if he gets there on time? I mean, there's really no consequence to
people. People use 2-for-1 time for school. That's a tool I developed for it basically says, look, I'm going to be in the car at 8 o'clock to drive you to school. And at 8:01, if you're not in the car, I'm going to just start the timer. And for every minute that goes by, you're going to have 2 minutes less internet time.
Okay.
That's all. whatever. You just create some sort of economy with an autonomous aspect to it where he controls how it is and say, look, do it or don't do it, or just blow off school entirely. But know that the internet won't go on that day, and you won't be driven anywhere else. I mean, that will have to happen first. But I'm not going to chase you around the house anymore. What I'm going to do is get in the car at 8 o'clock and turn on a timer, and that'll tell me what's happening for you in the afternoon. And it won't be my decision anymore. Whether it's a 1-minute consequence or it's a 2-hour consequence, that'll be out of my hands.
Okay.
Why? Because you're 18 and this is a time in your life when most of the consequences of your choices are going to be out of my hands anyway. So let's get used to it.
Yep.
Nothing you suck. Why are you doing this? This is horrible. Why are you being so mean to me? It's like, look, this really has nothing to do with you. It has to do with me and what I need. And I just decided I'm going to focus on what I control and stop trying to control you. I don't want to control you anymore. I just want to put a price on what I need. And if you pay it, I'll give it to you. And if you don't pay it, I won't give it to you. And that's it. Let you figure it out. I'm sorry. I've been in your business. I'm getting out. Okay.
I'll try.
All right. It's not easy. You're going to have a fight. That's the one thing that really, the more you can realize that when you start a program like this, whether it's with a really willful 5-year-old or an 18-year-old, you're going to have a fight. So don't be detached to peace. Have the fight in a way that when you repeat that over and over again leads to a different relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just hold that boundary, try and be respectful, take away the judgment, keep a high expectation, and good luck.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. I am going to wrap up because it's we've gone a little over, but I enjoyed talking to everybody. And if you have questions, you can always send me an email. I've got a website, raisinglions.com. There'll be some new webinars that I start that'll come in. That'll come on in January. I do webinars for parents. I do one-on-one consulting for parents as well. And if you send me an email, I can give you a client access link. Tells you about that. Yeah. And that's it. And by Raising Lions.
So thank you so much for coming out. So this is Thea from Summit Camp. I'm sorry I'm on a loud, noisy bus with a bunch of kids. As most of you know, Thea travels down the hallway.
Nice to see you, Thea.
Bus with a bunch of kids. She's
Great. Well, listen, thank you so much for having me on. I'd love to come back and talk to the Summit community, and we can figure that out. And hope everyone has a great night. I'm about to go out to dinner.
And your book would make a very good present for Hanukkah or Christmas.
I need to hire Nanette to do my marketing. She's clearly
Anytime.
better than I am. Yeah, get the second edition. And yeah, and I hope you all the best, and reach out if you need help.
Thank you so much again. Good night, guys.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
coming.
Good night. Nice to see you, Nanette.
Not see you, Joe.
5-day hunger strike in support of a ceasefire. Of course, she's senators wrote a letter opposing efforts to provide border security, opposing